Guys, I've got a confession to make. I hate doing character creation. I know. It's supposed to be one of those most fulfilling of activities, but dear God, do I hate it in D&D. Hello, you wonderful people, I'm Dracthonia, and I'm here to help you in your pursuit to your best self, one game at a time. Today, we're going to tackle the character sheet. Yes, that fabled monster of sheets, the thing that puts off every newbie imaginable. We're going to try and simplify it as much as possible. Meanwhile, if you'd like to keep up to date with all of my D&D goodies and YouTube releases, why don't you like, subscribe, and obey, and join the Discord for some D&D freebies and to chat about D&D further. Alright, let's get on with it, shall we? So, the character sheet. It is alarmingly long and also very intimidating, and I can understand why new players may be put off by the entire endeavour. However, I think we can simplify it. Yes, I think it is possible. I'll try to do my best. Unfortunately, as it's one of my least favourite parts of D&D, I probably will end up complaining through this entire video. So, strap in as we try to summarise the character sheet in 5 easy digestible parts. Part number 1 is race. Race is super important for deciding how your character is going to be, how it's going to act, how it's going to interact with the world in general. It affects things like vision, including whether or not you can see in the dark and how far you can see, to things like age and size, but also, more importantly, it affects things like proficiencies in weapons and general tool use. It can also affect your skills, so it is super important to decide what race you're going to be as the first thing that you tackle. Now, to try and simplify this, I'm going to use Bob the Bartender to highlight the various aspects that I think are important. So, Bob the Bartender, I'm going to say, is a human. And being a human, that means that he ends up with a +1 to all of his ability scores. Now, that is awesome, because he's all round better at things in general and has a advantage when it comes to being a jack of all trades. Race helps you in character build. Some races give you advantage to certain tool use. For example, gnomes tend to get advantages to tool use for tinkerers, while elves tend to be magic users. But at the end of the day, it's your choice. You can pick whatever race you want and build the character around it. It's just that certain races have certain advantages. It's the same way as you can build a character in Skyrim and you go for a Khajiit and they tend to be pretty good at sneaking. And you decide to go for a sword and shield kind of user and hit everything full frontal and aggressively. It's entirely your choice, whatever floats your boat. Picking race first helps you decide whether or not you are going to utilise what's advantageous to your character, or whether or not you're just going to go for whatever takes your fancy. Now, the next thing that I would advise taking into consideration is your class. Now, class affects a bunch of other stuff, including your proficiencies, your level goodies, your armor, your spells and spell slots, and also your class features. Now, this is quite a large section, and deciding on what your class is going to be really is based on whether or not you want to go for an easy build or something a little bit more challenging with a lot more math. Now, for Bob Bartender, we're going to go for a fighter, because really, Bob doesn't really need to do anything other than break up a few bar brawls. Picking your class is important for your ability scores, because certain classes require a certain level of ability score. So class helps you determine which of your ability scores needs to be the highest. This is why I think it's probably the best thing to go for as your second choice. Class also determines your hit dice and your base gear, but I highly recommend reading up on your class before you set it in stone, because each class is individual. Each class has its different attributes, its different perks, and its different level up abilities. This is something that you really need to read and decide where you want to go with it. So if you want something that is more first time, less maths, I'd go for a fighter or a monk or a barbarian. But if you're feeling really spicy, then you could go for a warlock or a wizard. Next, we've got the ability scores. Now, ability scores is where it gets kind of confusing. So, ability scores, we have strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Different DMs have different ways of allocating points in your first level character. Some use a base level of points that you just allocate the highest to the one that you want to be the highest, while others require you to roll them new. In all the games that I've played, generally we've used the base stats of 18, 16, 14, 12, 12, and 10. So with Bob the Bartender, we're going to allocate our highest number to strength, because he's a fighter and because he spends most of his days lifting heavy barrels. We're then going to allocate 16 to his dex, because sometimes he has to dodge all of those glasses that are thrown at him by drunks. Next, we've got constitution to 14, which, you know, he doesn't really need a lot of hit points, but he's above average after his fighting days. Then we have intelligence and wisdom at 12, because anyone who has decided to run a bar in a war-torn environment probably isn't that smart. And then we have charisma at 10, because anyone with a monkey's arse as a nose is definitely not that charismatic. But do remember, as a human, he has a +1 to all of those, which then puts him above the average. For ability scores, we have to remember that 10 equals normal. This is your bog standard NPC. They aren't good at anything in particular, but they aren't bad at anything in particular either. Anything below 10 gives you a minus to your ability modifier, and everything above 10 gives you a plus. Now, the ability modifier is your most important aspect of the ability scores. Your ability scores, basically, they're useless after you've created your character. The ability modifiers is the smaller number below your ability scores that's really key to your everyday D&D experience. This is what you use to determine your attack rolls, your saving throws, pretty much anything that requires you to do a roll. So really, that's the thing that you need to pay attention to, not so much your ability scores after this point. Next, we have your, what I like to call, flavour bits. On the one side, you have something that's really important, which is your background, which can influence various different aspects of your character. And then you've got the sprinkles, which is things like your alignment and your flaws and your bonds and ideals. Things that really is just you defining your character. Now, there are two aspects to the background. There is the one that the book gives you to help you build your background and a story around it. And then there's a bit that means that you have to write up your own story and how you want to play your character. And really, in general, the only thing that's going to affect your character build is going to be the aspects that the book recommends for that particular background. So let's say, for example, that Bob the bartender is a sage. So this adds things like skill proficiencies in Arcana and History, while it also gives you 2 language choices, and it even adds equipment to your characters, such as ink and a small knife. It also adds specialities to help you flesh out your character background if you're struggling to build it. And within that, there's also a handy table to help you select personality traits and various bonds and flaws. So if you need it, the book does provide you with those options. But if you instead wish to actually just build your own character background, then that's good too. This is purely to help you build certain aspects, add a few perks, and help you build a story. Lastly, there's your equipment. Your equipment determines your damage and your tool use. Your damage is determined by your weapon plus your strength or dex modifiers. And in your equipment, there's also your armor, which determines your AC. Your AC is your armor class, which is your armor plus your dexterity modifier. Now, while this is a quick overview of the 5 key compartments of your character sheet, there are a couple of things that you need to think about outside of this. This includes your passive perception, your initiative, and your inspiration. Now, there are a couple of things outside of these 5 elements that are important. For example, there is your proficiency bonus, which is determined by your level. Every character has the same proficiency bonus. There's a handy guide in the book with the proficiency bonus depending on the level. And basically, this is used if something says you're proficient, you get to add this to your rolls. Proficiency bonus is also used in your passive perception, which is 10 plus your wisdom modifier plus your proficiency bonus. And this is something that you don't need to worry about. This is for your DM. But it's good to put that in your character sheet so that your DM can access that information. Then there's initiative. Initiative determines where you go in the combat order and is purely determined by your dexterity modifier. So at the beginning of any fight, you will roll a dexterity check to see in what order you will go in combat situations. Then there's inspiration. Really, any adventurer should live to earn inspiration. It is the favor of the gods, i.e. your DM. Inspiration is something that you may or may not get from your DM to make an advantage roll at any time in which you choose, but it is all down to your DM's choice and will. So try to please your DM in any way imaginable. They're the guys that will give you that extra tasty inspiration. Otherwise, don't worry about it. Some DMs use it, some don't. Ask your DM, see what they think. And remember, at the end of the day, you can ask your DM for help with these things. Your DM will be able to help you with any questions you have about your character build, what they particularly want in their world that they're building, and can probably clear up a few things if you get confused. Do remember that you are working in a group, not on your own. And with that, I hope that this was helpful. I hope that this gave you an easy way to understand the character sheet. If you have any questions about the character sheet, please do let me know in the comments below. I'm sorry if this was stupidly confusing, because honestly, that is the character sheet. So I hope you have a good time creating your first character, and I will see you guys soon. Say bye, guys! Lastly, there is your equipment. Equipment, yes, equipment.